My name is Jamie Neufeld. I'm the Director of Rental Assistance for the Reno Housing Authority. And yes, thank you all so much for having me here to talk about kind of everyone's favorite topic, which is vouchers. Um, I do have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in a second. And so forgive me if I am completely technically glitching here. Let's see. Let's see if this works. Feeling good about it for the moment. Going to go ahead and come on, let me advance my slide. There we go. Found the keys to it. So just do a brief agency overview about the Reno Housing Authority, what we do. Talk a little bit to our admissions process, since a lot of the folks that we would be looking to housing with vouchers. It's nice to kind of have that insight into what that process is. Talk for literally one slide about the programs that we offer, and then really dive into housing choice vouchers and project-based vouchers. And then talk about the voucher program in a bit more detail, saving plenty of time for questions as anyone has them. So a little bit about the Reno Housing Authority. Mission of the Housing Authority is to provide fair, sustainable, quality housing in diverse neighborhoods throughout Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County that offers a stable foundation for low-income families to pursue economic opportunities, become self-sufficient, and improve their quality of life.
Jamie, I was going to say, we have to say that every day by heart before we step into our offices. They require us. I'm joking. No one ever says it.
You're kind of joking. Just kind of.
Yeah.
My goal is to have one that we can have memorized. Like easy, little sound bite. So kind of an idea of how we do that, how we achieve that mission. So we currently have, and I'm sure JD could talk more on it if he wanted to, 751 units of public housing, though we are in the process of converting some of those units over to more of a voucher system through a process called RAD conversion. We have over 2,500 housing choice vouchers. And we'll talk more in a little bit about how project-based vouchers factor into that number. We have 541 Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing vouchers, or VASH vouchers. Another more than 150 other special purpose vouchers. That includes Foster Youth to Independence, or FYI vouchers, Emergency Housing vouchers, or EHVs. So some other special purpose vouchers. And then we also offer additional affordable, or what we call community benefit housing, properties that we own and rent out at just an affordable rate to the community outside of our public housing or voucher programs. 2/3 of our residents are seniors or persons with disabilities. 68% of residents fall under 30% of the area median income. And I still have it on this slide, but April just told us earlier this week, we say nearly 9,000 residents in 4,000 plus households, but April told us that that's actually an, I will say, outdated or miscalculated number. It's actually closer to 15,000 residents in 4,000 households. So we're serving a very large population of folks here through the Housing Authority. Real quickly talking to the admissions process. So admissions, their goal is to verify all the information, ensure we have current documentation before someone is getting housed with a voucher or in public housing. They are screening to make sure they are eligible for those programs based on the federal eligibility requirements. So they're looking at criminal history, landlord history, if it's a public housing program or a project-based program where, you know, like we own the unit or something like that. Same with the credit checks if it's public housing. Or a project-based voucher unit that we own. Doing income verifications for all of the reported income for the household to make sure that they're paying the correct portion based on their household income. If they're found ineligible for any of those reasons, then they get withdrawn from our wait lists. In order to apply for assistance, waitlists must be open. So this timing of this is actually really great because our waitlists are in fact open. So anyone who is looking for assistance, now is a great time to get onto our website and go ahead and apply. Each waitlist has different requirements. You would move up and down on those waitlists independently, depending on availability of vouchers, vacancies, and public housing and project-based voucher programs. And so we very much encourage folks to apply for as many waitlists as they qualify for, to ensure that they get housed the fastest. We do not currently provide emergency rental assistance. That being said, Washoe Affordable Housing Corporation has a homeless prevention program that will soon be moving under Reno Housing Authority. So we will begin to operate that very shortly. And we administer City of Sparks' eviction prevention program. So it's not our own funds, but we do administer it for the City of Sparks. That is only for folks, though, in the corporate City of Sparks. So we are very close to some emergency rental assistance. All of our applications right now are done online, but
Jamie,
if we have, yes, JD.
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to clarify. We recently moved to a site-based wait list, right? For our, so it's not a program. You don't just apply for public housing now. You'd have to make sure you're on a wait list for each of the public housing sites or our project-based sites, which is a bit, I just want folks to know it's a bit different than what we've done in the past. If you've gotten folks on a wait list before, it's now they have to choose all the properties they're interested into.
Yep. Yeah, definitely speaking to that, like get on as many waiting lists as you could possibly be interested in or qualify for. Because yes, now for talk about it a little bit later, but our 8 public housing sites currently, we have 8 waiting lists for those sites. So getting on the waiting list for each site that they would qualify for. Applications are done online, but if the household lacks the technology to be able to do that, language barrier, anything like that, they can complete a form with our office that basically saves their place in line as if they had applied right then, that date and time. And then our staff would be able to help walk them through that application and get it submitted for them, saving their place in line. Because our waiting lists are based on date and time as well as preferences. So we want to save their date and time as quickly as possible. Again, we do preferences to help determine place on waiting lists. That includes veteran preferences, recent graduates from permanent supportive housing, folks who are lease in place. So essentially the unit that they are currently residing in, that landlord is willing to accept a voucher. Or folks who are currently unsheltered, homeless, all would be getting some sort of preference point on our waiting list that may move them up faster than someone else who maybe had applied a little earlier than they had. Really quickly speaking to the programs that we offer, kind of falling into some larger categories here. We have our Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8. Participants in that program receive rental assistance at the unit of their choice. We say in Washoe County, but they actually do have the ability to take that assistance, we call it portable, to any housing authority in the United States that also has a Housing Choice Voucher Program. So they have a lot of mobility with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Lots of different types of vouchers fall under that Housing Choice Voucher Program, and each has different rules, restrictions, and benefits associated with it, but it all kind of lumps up under the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The project-based voucher program, where the assistance is tied to that unit. So if the family decides to move out of that unit, the assistance would not necessarily move with them. In that case, they come up on the project-based voucher waiting list. They are referred to a specific unit. It may or may not be owned by the housing authority. We do have a lot of our own project-based vouchers, but there are project-based vouchers in the community with owners that are not RHA. And then our public housing program. We have currently 8 public housing complexes. Similar to project-based vouchers, the assistance is tied to the unit. So those families are not able to move from those units and take the assistance with them. But now really diving into what we want to talk about, housing choice vouchers and project-based vouchers. So housing choice vouchers, or Section 8, households under that program are expected to pay between 30 to 40% of their income towards rent and utilities. That's HUD's expectation. on what is considered an appropriate rent burden for a household under that program. And that range allows them to have that choice in where they want to live. Ideally, HUD would want rent burden to be at 30%, but by giving that 10% wiggle room, someone is able to choose maybe a more expensive unit, more upgraded unit, a different area of town that meets their family's needs. And so they're able to pay that little bit more of their income towards it to have that opportunity of choice in their housing. The difference between the unit's contract rent and their portion of the rent is what's known as the housing assistance payment, or HAP. And that's what the housing authority pays directly to the landlord. And like we had mentioned before, the assistance is not tied to the unit. So if that family decides at the end of their lease that they want to move somewhere else, maybe they want to be closer to their job, or maybe they want to change schools for their kids, they can choose to move to a different area of town, or like we said, go portable to somewhere outside of Washoe County and take that assistance with them and still have housing assistance when they move to a new unit. Project-based vouchers, the portion of the rent that the household pays is set at that 30%. Those households don't necessarily have the choice that the housing choice voucher provides, because they are being assigned to that specific unit, but they are again set at that 30% of their income for rent and utilities. Again, the housing authority is paying that HAP, that housing assistance payment, directly to the landlord to cover the difference between the contract rent and what that tenant's income is able to cover. And this assistance is tied to the unit. So if the family decides to move and aren't eligible for another type of assistance, they would no longer have that housing assistance. Part of the project-based voucher program is called Choice Mobility, where after 1 year in the program, they are eligible to request to be on to be transferred to a housing choice voucher so that they could take that assistance with them. And essentially what that does is that moves them to the top of the housing choice voucher waiting list. If there's no voucher available to be issued to them, they would just have to wait there in their project-based voucher unit until a voucher was available, but they would be issued the very next available housing choice voucher, and then they would be eligible to move and have assistance. But if for some reason a voucher wasn't available and they were like, no, I need to move right now, they would be choosing to move and leave their assistance behind. Where do PBVs come? Oh, JD.
I wanted to be more polite this time versus just jumping in. For the lease up process, like, so when if a private landlord, or let's say a developer who's not, it's not the RHA, if they have a set of project-based vouchers, do they manage the lease up of the project-based unit, or is that something that's done in partnership with the housing authority? Very
good question. So it's kind of a partnership where if there's a vacancy in a project-based voucher unit, the landlord for that unit notifies the housing authority of that vacancy. We go to the appropriate project-based voucher waiting list and then are interviewing those top candidates to make sure they still are eligible, qualify, we have everything we need. And then we would refer that top candidate directly to the property and say, this person's the next person. That landlord, that property still has the ability to do their own screening. Depending on the RFP that the PBVs were issued under, there may be certain qualifications there where maybe screening criteria are waived or something like that. But it's kind of a partnership where they say, hey, I now have a vacancy in PBV. We find the PBV family off the wait list for the most part, refer them to the property, and then the property says, yep, we're going forward with it. And we get the lease up taken care of that way.
All right, thanks for explaining.
Of course. So project-based vouchers come from converting part of the housing authority's allocation of housing choice vouchers. There are no additional vouchers given to the housing authority by HUD. There's no additional funding given to the housing authority. Essentially, if HUD has given us, we'll call it 2,500 vouchers, housing choice vouchers to use, and we want to project-base them, we have to take those away from that 2,500 number that we have in order to issue project-based vouchers. So Why do we project-based vouchers if there's no funding, if we're not given vouchers to do so? And for us, it's truly a balancing act, looking at the pros and the cons, what our clients need, what the market needs. Some of the pros to project-based vouchers on a unit is that it secures some long-term affordable housing availability. Our project-based voucher contracts are typically 20 years, and they usually renew for another 20 years after that. So we're talking typically around 40 years of affordable housing tied to that unit. So we know we're going to have a place where we can put tenants into those pots. And kind of what we were talking about a little bit is depending on the RFP that the vouchers were issued under, they may be targeted to specific populations. So if there's an underserved population, a hard to serve population that those PDVs were made for, it may kind of help better match them to a unit than just kind of sending them into the wild, into the market to hopefully find a unit on their own. So it has some benefits to be able to have those units secured for a long time at an affordable rate, and to be able to hopefully more easily help sometimes hard to house clients. The con is what we were saying. It reduces the number of housing choice vouchers that we have available, meaning that people on the housing choice voucher waiting list tend to stay there longer. So again, just kind of a balancing act for the housing authority. Speaking to the types of units that get project-based vouchers, both existing units and new construction may be eligible for PBVs. It just depends on the RFP, the request for proposals that's being put out at that time, if there are any specific requirements that are part of that one. But the project-based voucher contract can absolutely accommodate both existing units and new construction, as well as a variety of structure types. Units could be single-family homes, duplexes, townhouses, apartments. There really is no one-size-fits-all answer for a project-based voucher unit. So really, one of the big questions we get asked is, how do I get project-based vouchers for your units? Yeah, Juliana.
Hi, sorry, maybe I jumped the gun. Sorry, I was just going to ask, like, how does a property get project-based vouchers? So, never mind.
Question.
I'll be patient.
You're fine. So the way that you get project-based vouchers is the Housing Authority has to issue a request for proposals specifying the projects that are going to be eligible for it. So like I said, there may be a specific population that we're looking to serve with those project-based vouchers. It may be looking for specifically new construction, specifically existing units. So depending on kind of where that goal is, that target is, the RFP will be released with all of that information in it. I just recently went through my first RFP process. I'm kind of still in the middle of it. And truly surprised me just the depth of information that's included in those. And I'm going to actually show an example of it for anyone who hasn't looked at this before, because it definitely took me by surprise. The timing of when we release those RFPs based on funding availability. Like I said, the funding is the same funding that we have for our housing choice vouchers. So making sure we're balancing how much funding we have for that program, the utilization of the number of vouchers that we have. So do we have enough spare that we could set them aside, not just temporarily, but again, for 20 to 40 years into the future, having that chunk of vouchers kind of on hold for being PBV'd. So looking at all of that and then saying, yeah, this is a good time, good population, good things all around. Let's issue an RFP. That's done through our website. We'll put it up on the Doing Business with Us part of our website. And then interested parties submit their proposals through there. Getting really into the technical details, it uses something called Demand Star to submit those proposals for review and scoring. Depending on the number of PBVs that are available and the number of submissions that we get, some applications may receive the full award that they submitted for, Some may receive partial awards, some may not receive an award at all. Again, it just depends on the scoring of those applications, how many vouchers we had. I mean, if we were releasing an RFP to PBV 5 units and we had 10 people apply for it all, not everyone's going to get vouchers. But if we're doing a larger number and we only get 2 applications, then there's a chance that people may get some or all of the vouchers they were asking for to PBV. So a lot of factors kind of go into that. I believe, yeah, I included an example here, again, of the RFP that we just closed. So it's not an active one that someone could apply for at the moment. But this is one that we had just recently done to allocate project-based HUD-VASH vouchers. So again, very specific population, HUD-VASH. And this one was for housing elderly or senior homeless veterans and their families. And this was for looking at the goal of an entire complex or a significant chunk of a complex, not just 1 or 2 vouchers, some there. So a lot of the very specific information within that RFP. I'm not going to bore us all with reading through the entire thing, but if I'm not mistaken, it's 9 pages long. So a lot of great details in here. And if you are just curious about reading more into the details of what these RFPs look like and kind of the level that it would be, you can absolutely like drop your email in the chat and I would happily send you over this one. Cause like I said, this one's closed. So it's not like anyone could still apply to it. But one of the great parts goes through all of the eligibility criteria on here for being eligible to apply for those, minimum threshold criteria, some general conditions, and very end, the evaluation criteria, all of the scoring that's going to be used to determine essentially who gets the awards on there. So again, very detailed information in these RFPs on who's going to be getting awards. Oh, I see Juliana's. Yes, I will make sure to send you over a copy of that. So yeah, very detailed information on those RFPs. But it is definitely an involved process to be able to issue project-based vouchers. Then just wanted to touch really briefly through kind of the rest of the voucher program. I know usually that's the biggest part is talking about the PBVs and the difference with the HCV program. But for anyone who's working with folks that have vouchers, wanted to just give some brief insight into the voucher program that may help kind of with the day-to-day of working with any of these folks. So once someone's been referred for a voucher, either PBV or HCV, they will be scheduled for a briefing. The briefing is when we issue them their voucher, the paper to look for a unit if they're an HCV. They sign off on all their forms. So it's very important that they attend to these briefings. And we do typically only reschedule them once. So again, very important that they are taking part in this process. If they are an HCV client and they're going to be going out into the market and shopping for their unit, they get that paperwork at the briefing and take it out to the community, find a landlord that's willing to accept them. They have to bring that paperwork back to us before their voucher expires in order to be able to receive assistance from us. The lease-up process, again, this mostly applies to HCV. We're looking for 2 things kind of specifically with the rent that's being charged for the unit, that it's affordable and that it's reasonable. And these kind of get confused with each other a lot. Affordable is specific to that family. So that family has 2 adults, 3 minors, people are working at different levels. And so all of that factors into how much they can afford to pay towards their rent and utilities. And so that affordable number is based on literally just that household's information. You could have another household with 2 adults and 3 minors, but they make a tiny bit different amount less or more. And their affordability number will be different. So affordability is specific to exactly that household. So we're looking that the rent that landlord's going to charge for that unit is affordable to that household. then we're also going to be looking at reasonableness. So is the rent that that landlord wants to charge going to be reasonable for the type of unit that it is in the neighborhood that it's in, regardless of who's going to be living there. But is their 2-bedroom apartment in South Reno worth what they say it's worth compared to other 2-bedroom apartments in South Reno? So we have to look at both of those. And so we may say, yeah, a 2-bedroom apartment in South Reno is totally worth what they say, but that family can't afford that. We would still have to deny it. So we do both of those tests. And that's one that people get tripped up a lot on, is they think as long as it passes one, they're okay. If the unit is not affordable or reasonable, we do reach out to the landlord and try and negotiate it. So on either side, if the family can't afford it, we'll see if the landlord will come down on the rent to what the family can afford. If it's fine for the family, but it's not reasonable for the area, we'll talk to the landlord and, you know, explain that to them, see if they'll come down to what's reasonable for the area, and see if we can make it work so the family can go forward with that unit. Once we've got affordability and reasonableness worked out, we will schedule the inspection. We cannot pay until the unit passes inspection, and it's found affordable and reasonable. Currently, we're using something called housing quality standards to do the inspections, but we are rapidly moving towards HUD's new protocol called Inspire. That's coming late 2024, but essentially they are minimum health and safety criteria for assisted housing, focused primarily on the unit, the area that the family is going to be spending the most time in, but also a bit of the premises as well. We always reinforce our inspectors are not code enforcement officials, health department inspectors, construction or building inspectors. They are just there for those HUD health and safety criteria. Once they're on the program, they have to recertify their income either every year or every 3 years, depending on if it's super stable income to the household. As their income changes, their portion of the rent changes, and we will notify both them and the landlord when those portions change. Once someone's on assistance with a voucher, there is no like income limit. There is no set amount that once they start making that amount, they are kicked off the program. What it becomes is when they start making so much money that that 30 to 40% number covers the full contract rent, they are able to pay the full contract rent with their income, then they're considered self-sufficient. With our housing authority, we allow them to do that, pay the full contract rent for 12 months while they're still on our program. It's kind of a safety net. So in case something happens during that 12 months, the income goes away, the voucher picks right back up, we start paying again, and they're still receiving assistance. But if they pay it for 12 months, they're still self-sufficient, then they're moved off that program. And we give them a little kind of escrow bonus for achieving that self-sufficiency to kind of help with that benefits cliff. To help out with our landlords, we offer a new landlord briefing on the last Wednesday of every month via Teams. Great way to get some information and to have them get some questions answered. We also have a landlord liaison. Her name's Crystal. She conducts those briefings, but she's also available Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, to work with them, answer their questions, help them out with our relatively new landlord portal through the website, and just kind of make them feel comfortable and supported through this lease-up process. And with that, if I can get to my button, any questions?
No questions? You must
Um,
have done an excellent job with your presentation. You covered all possible information.
That is kind. I feel like there's just haven't bubbled to the surface yet.
Jamie, and I feel like we have lots of times developers come and say, hey, do you have project-based vouchers? And it seems like we have a challenge connecting the dots with them sometimes. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what are some of the challenges that the developers may have in getting project-based vouchers into their projects?
I think traditionally it's been, I don't want to say like not clear messaging, but not being clear that it's part of this RFP process, so that it's not as simple as just you want some, you need some, award it, but that it does have to be awarded through this RFP process. We have recently had a couple developers reach out and say they were interested, but maybe didn't have a good fit with that RFP that I showed on there that was, looking for an entire complex of HUD Bash. Oh, see, now we're getting questions. That's good. And so we were kind of taking that information so that way the next time we do have an RFP that might be a better fit, we can make sure to give a nod to those developers and see if maybe that one might be a better fit. So I think just getting that kind of clear messaging that it is part of an RFP process, but keeping kind of that interest list in mind of people that would want to be contacted. I think that William was our first hand up there.
Yeah, but Bill is fine. William is usually when I'm in trouble for something. I'm curious, what percentages of the folks who approach you looking for housing don't qualify or you can't find a housing option for them? Is it a big number? Is it a little number? It sounds like you're very busy.
It's a very good question. So I can tell you with my program specifically, and with our housing choice vouchers, the ones that actually have to go out there and look for assistance. Right now we have about a 59% success rate. So a little over half of the folks that we give a housing choice voucher to go out on the market and are able to find a unit and lease up. The other, help me out, 41%. Aren't able to find a unit for whatever reason. I say aren't able to find a unit. They maybe have something else come along and decide not to use their voucher, but the other 41% don't end up using their voucher for whatever reason. So the last time I ran the numbers, we were running a 59% success rate on our housing choice vouchers.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Juliana, were you next?
I think so. On the project-based vouchers, the RFP, my question is I understand there's like several factors that go into when you release the RFP and its balancing act, but is this done like on an annual basis or is it just like randomly, sporadically, or?
Fair question. We have not yet had a set schedule for it. I know with this particular release, they were for the HUD Bash vouchers, and we'd actually, those ones we do receive a fresh allocation of VASH vouchers. So we were able to work with the VA and decide to project base a significant chunk of the new VASH vouchers that we received. HUD has not traditionally given a bunch of new housing choice vouchers out. That being said, we have been hearing the community and hearing a lot of requests for project-based vouchers. So it is very much something that we are aware of and kind of looking at what's the best way we can get these out as equitably as possible while still maintaining kind of the essence of the program that we need to for everything else. So no set schedule, but going to look at kind of what we were saying with, is it a big award that we're doing, releasing a big number and lots of little awards within there, or doing, multiple smaller RFPs throughout the year, seeing what the best fit might be to help the most people as possible. Julia?
Hello.
Hi.
You mentioned some of the preferences, veteran, homeless, etc. I've just done my first few apps this week for our people here at Hope Springs, and like those questions didn't come up on the initial app. So at what point does some of those come up?
Very good question. I have to double check because we just recently converted to our new software system. That's where our applications are run through. So I'm not sure if it's just a difference because of that conversion that it's showing up at a different time. I know much prior to this, they waited to do the preferences until someone came up for an interview. But I would happily check in with our admissions team and see if that's something that's maybe just a little hiccup in this new system, or if that's a plan. They knew that that was happening, and that once they get all the applications in, they're gonna send something out and ask for new information or verify that. So I'd happily check in on that and get that back to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, Jamie, if you don't mind, I do think one of the things from a developer standpoint, right, folks come up with an idea that like, okay, this would totally work if we could get project-based vouchers. So we're gonna go and see if we can get project-based vouchers. And what I think one of the main takeaways for folks is like, that's just not how project-based vouchers work. So I would like moving forward, it's like, hey, we want to be on the lookout for a project-based voucher RFP. And if we're interested in building permanent supportive housing, it actually might come much earlier in the process than you've gotten together your pro forma and all this stuff, because you really you can't show project-based vouchers in your pro forma and your financing until they've been awarded. So I think sometimes what happens now is folks get an idea, they wait till much later in the process to see if project-based vouchers are available. And I think the information you're sharing, Jamie, should encourage folks to think it actually probably needs to be part of your early due diligence of, are they available? Is there an RFP coming up that we should be paying attention to for our projects? And I would also encourage developers to be reaching out to us to say, here's the kind of permanent supportive housing I'm interested in building. I don't know when the next time it is you're issuing an RFP, but I want to let you know this is what we're seeing, this is what the need is, so that the housing authority has a sense of how to issue the RFP so that it really gets to the need that folks are interested in. Versus I think sometimes it's like in a black box for a lot of developers. So they get it together and they're like, oh, if the RHA would only give us project-based vouchers, and it's just not the way that HUD allows us to utilize that resource.
Absolutely. Thank you, JD.
Yeah. I would say for anyone who is developing like with LIHTC or anything, vouchers, housing choice vouchers are like gold for you because, right, your LIHTC rent is capped at whatever the income, the AMI says it has to be. But if you have a tenant who is income eligible with a voucher, you can get the full voucher amount. So if you have a low-income housing tax credit property, it makes a ton of sense to rent to as many voucher holders as possible because you're actually going to be increasing the rent that you bring in, kind of, and it'd be like above your budget. Your budget's supposed to operate at those capped rents, but you're actually bringing additional revenue in that you wouldn't otherwise be able to unless you were accepting a housing choice voucher. So
that's really interesting, JD. Do you kind of have an estimation of how many of our kind of more standard affordable housing LIHTC developers, not supportive housing, are there like several that don't accept vouchers for some reason?
no, you have to. You're required to.
Okay.
That's part of the IRS code for low-income
That's
housing.
what I thought, that it would be a requirement, but when you said that, I was like, wait.
Yeah, well, what I would say is it's
does
a
make
requirement, right? But I think I would encourage landlord, or especially those folks on their property management front, to think about how do we work with the housing authority? How do we have a good relationship? How do we treat all of our tenants well, but especially recognizing folks getting in with a voucher might be a longer process. So I don't think there's anyone who refuses, but I think there are some developers who might not have the patience to work with.
Maybe some barriers. Yeah, totally. So maybe kind of more of a community-wide understanding of the processes and a kind of shared tenant selection plan, like between the housing authority and the developers that are required to take vouchers. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I put a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh. I don't see it. Did you send it to everybody or to?
Oh, I don't know. So well,
Well, just
I'll just ask them. I'll just ask them then. And I put them in the chat because I didn't want to be greedy. I'd like to ask which is more challenging, HCVs or PVVs. And what are the practical differences in working with these different kinds of vouchers?
That's a really great question. From my point of view with the voucher program, I would say they're nearly identical at that point. Functionally on the program, they operate almost the exact same. So they're really easy for our line staff to be able to work with. There's really no distinction there. I would say in my own mind, it's honestly a little easier for the PBVs. For just because it's that easy one-to-one referral. We have the person, we have the unit, they're matched, they're done. So that part I would say is much easier than having to go out and shop for the unit, negotiate the rents, and all of that part of it. But other than that, the day-to-day, I would say they're otherwise nearly equivalent to work with.
Bill, I just add to that from the developer part, right? It's easier to get a tenant with a housing choice voucher into your unit, which is great on the back end, but it doesn't let you pull together all your financing on the front end. You can't count on housing choice vouchers. You can't include that number when you're putting together your budget. If you get it, it's great. It's like a bonus. Whereas project-based vouchers, it's more difficult to get, but once you get them, you can then show your lenders, your investors, like, here's how much rent we're going to get from these vouchers, which is higher than we would get otherwise. So, yeah, I think in terms of compliance, they're very similar, but it's just a different process in terms of piecing them together as a developer.
Why project-based vouchers are more valuable for permanent supportive housing, right? Because you're targeting those deeper income levels. So you really need to be able to find a way to make sure you have enough operating funds.
Right, like your 30% AMI units, right? So someone in 30% AMI, it's like it's like 440 or something, right? For the 1 bedroom, 30% AMI. If you have a LIHTC at 30% AMI with no voucher, you're getting $400 a month in rent on that unit, which is nowhere going to keep up with your costs. If you have someone in that unit who's still 30% AMI, but with a project-based voucher, you're getting $1,200 a month in rent on that unit. So that difference lets you think about services. It lets you think about a lot of other things. But really, when it comes to permanent supportive housing, is the lower the income, the more important the voucher becomes.
Yeah. For folks that are serving like really vulnerable populations, I'm gonna check the time. Like, folks that might not have any income for the first year they live somewhere while they're getting on disability, maybe. What does that look like from an operations standpoint? Like, are they gonna get some money so the tenants have zero income, so they're paying zero rent?
Mm-hmm.
So is that still feasible with the project-based voucher? So they'll still get the value of the voucher.
Yep.
But as someone increases their income, if they got disability, which I don't know what it is now, but like $700 a month, then they also get an additional 30% of the $700 a month.
They would then start paying that 30% of the $700 a month, and then the housing authority would make up whatever the difference was in the rent.
Got it. So it's the same as people increase their income, the operating expense is the same.
Yeah. Unless they increase their income and they're no longer eligible for the voucher.
Yeah. That's a good question too. I've never, when I worked in supportive housing, nobody ever made income that made them ineligible for the units because they were, largely disabled, frankly, and got on disability or SSI or SSDI without having a work history. So their income was quite low. But what happens in that scenario, like say, kind of for some of these programs that are targeting less vulnerable populations, like, if someone was in supportive housing and had a subsidy, but then, got a tech job or something.
It does happen. We do have some of those.
Yeah. So what's the process for that?
So depending on the like complex or where the vouchers are at, once they are at full contract rent, they've been there for the 12 months, they've been moved off, that project-based voucher can deactivate and just kind of sit there dormant for a while until they move out. Or if it's in maybe a larger complex and there's a similar unit available, maybe it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and there's a similar unit available. And I would say this is outside of my expertise, but maybe it would speak to JD's. that unit were, you know, a tax credit, certain percent or something, it would also have to meet those requirements. I don't know. Then it could potentially move to that other unit, set the PBV on that unit, and be able to rent to the PBV person, a new PBV person over at that unit. The person that was at full contract rent could stay in the unit, still be paying full contract rent, but the PBV would move and be able to start assisting someone new. If that's not a possibility, other units weren't available, or maybe it's a single family home, something like that, then it just stays dormant until that person moves out. And then once that person moves out, the PBV reactivates, a new person can be referred.
Okay, so yeah, so someone's not necessarily like put into transition just because they're kind of bettering their situation. They just increase their rent with their income. I think that's great.
I think that probably depends on the contract, contract you signed to get the project-based vouchers, probably lay out some of those specifics in terms of like what happens in that case.
Yeah. Interesting.
So if I could ask one more question. So if a developer is trying to build an apartment complex, for instance, and wants to be able to include subsidized housing, either HCVs or PBVs, how would that developer plan for that if they don't know that they're going to have the PBVs until there's a CFP? A lot of acronyms here.
Yeah.
Sorry. And would it make sense for them to look at HCVs instead? How would they how would they stack their funds if they're trying to make sure that subsidized housing is part of the project?
So I think that's what I was trying to talk about, the order of things. I think a lot of times developers get pretty far along in their concept before they have the conversation with the housing authority. So they're kind of like, hey, we've purchased this piece of land. We're pulling together the financing, right? We're moving that towards it, and they're with an expectation that they can finish developing within a certain time frame. And what probably needs to happen is much sooner on, either, you know, prior to purchasing land, or purchasing land with the understanding that we might hold on to this piece of land for quite some time until we're able to get all the different pieces together. That you can show those vouchers once you've been awarded them, right? So they might need to plan to do that first and then start pulling together the rest of the process. So you might have some land waiting, a project like, hey, if we can get enough project-based vouchers, we can start moving on this. But that is really right now, what I would say most developers who are interested in permanent supportive housing, one, need to be talking with Jamie and Heidi and making sure they know when RFPs are coming out, being in conversation about, hey, next time you put out an RFP, this is the kind of thing we're interested in doing, so we know what kind of RFP to release. But it's not so much like, hey, I'm going to build permanent supportive housing, I'm going to chug along until I need the vouchers, and then I'm going to go ask for them. That's just not how the process is going to work.
Is the incentive for the developers then that permanent supportive those vouchers become a stabilizing kind of finance tool?
Exactly.
But it can't. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what's the incentive for them to go after those vouchers early in the process if they don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the stacking?
So yeah, it's a really good question. So the main difference is that you're guaranteeing higher rent. So think of it as it's a funding source just as much as it is getting tax credits or getting gap financing. So it's less gap, essentially, right? You can say, here's what we can do with our rent. So maybe we can get 9% tax credits. It covers, I don't know, 80 or 70 to 80% of our costs. We still have about 30% we need to close. And then you can go after other very competitive funding, like home funding, which not everyone gets. Or you can say, hey, based on our voucher rents, we can actually take out a small loan. We could afford to provide services and take out a little bit of a loan to get across the finish line. So it gives you more wiggle room because you have more revenue coming into the property than you would otherwise trying to build a project for folks at 30% AMI with no voucher. You would have no wiggle room. And to be honest, you'd probably really struggle to cover your operating at all. If you had non-subsidized 30% AMI units, you just wouldn't collect enough in rent to even maybe pay staff or keep up on maintenance. So that's the incentive, is that your operating budgets will be much, much stronger. And then it gives you more ability to finance the project and also potentially invest that increased operating into services. So yeah. And in some jurisdictions, right, part of the challenge, and Jamie can probably talk to this too, we just don't get that many housing choice vouchers. So we're not able to, on an annual basis, project-based X amount of them. I think we've gotten, what, 18 or 30 in the last how many years?
We've gotten 30 new vouchers in the 15 years I have worked at the Housing Authority.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. HUD does not typically do new housing choice vouchers. They've been very much going towards the special purpose vouchers. So they gave emergency housing vouchers and FYI, foster youth vouchers. They've been experimenting with all of those, but have been kind of leaving the housing choice funds kind of in the dust. So yeah, very, very few new ones of those to be able to play around with.
Yeah. So that'd be the other thing too, Bill, is if you're trying to get project-based vouchers, it's best to look at some of those specialized populations, because that's actually where there's some ability to do it versus waiting for a housing choice voucher to get project-based. Because the truth is, I think, I don't know, our population has grown like 18%, if not more, in the last, and we haven't gotten 18% more vouchers. We've gotten 30 individual vouchers. So that's another thing too, is just right sizing project concept with the availability of actual project-based vouchers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jamie and JD and Hetty. I know Hetty logged off, but thank you also.
Thank you. Jamie did this. She's a rock star. She has an absurd amount of stuff going on right now. And I emailed her. She's like, sure. And I was like, I don't know how she does everything she does, but I so deeply appreciate her jumping on and walking us
It's
through.
a team effort, JD. It's a team effort. I did throw in the chat my email and Heidi McKendry's email. JD mentioned it, that developers that are, interested and kind of want to throw that idea out there of like, hey, we're interested in developing this, be interested in project-based vouchers for this project, this population, whatever, to kind of get into our little thought bubble for future RFPs. You can feel free to email us both, and then we will keep that information in mind for future releases.
Awesome. Jamie, would you be able to email me your slides and that example you showed, and then I'll send that out with the recording to everybody. So all the folks that aren't on the call, I'll put that information in the email as well to reach out to you if they have a project concept in mind that needs vouchers.
Absolutely. I will do that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Next month, we are going to be talking about fair housing and leasing. I'm trying to get CSH to come do that training, like specific to supportive housing, because I know there's a lot of kind of weird gray questions. It's not going to be like a fair housing training, like a property manager training. And so I'm still waiting to hear back on that. But either way, we'll have someone to come chat about kind of the different ways to create tenant selection plans for permanent supportive housing. So tune in, and then the month after that, I'll be in Reno, and we'll be talking more about operating budgets and mission-driven operations. So mission-driven property management scenarios. Cool.
Thanks all.
Yes, have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you guys soon.